This is what you will read about in the newspapers. It's called E1. E1, Israelis call it the Adumim region, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But E1, the great secret for it, this is not some fascinating code name. E just stands for east because this is the first block of territory east of Jerusalem. This is essentially the end of Jerusalem itself. The Hebrew University is kind of on the border. Although what you see here are neighborhoods of Jerusalem, they are, for all intents and purposes, no-go zones. They are controlled by the Palestinian Authority, and the Israeli police don't go in. So, for example, recently when a real estate agent who facilitated the sale of land owned by an Arab family to a Jewish family, he's an American citizen who was kidnapped and held by the Palestinian Authority. He was actually taken from one of these neighborhoods. The Palestinian Authority is far more active there than the state of Israel is, and this is another problem, but we'll see it in real time as we descend from Mount Scopus. So what we're looking at here is essentially the gateway to the Judean desert, east from Jerusalem. The road you see here on your right is Route 1. Now, everywhere in the world, it's pretty much an axiom that when you call a highway Route 1, it means it's important. Right? It's not some small side road. That is the main artery that serves the capital of Israel, Jerusalem. It connects Jerusalem to the Dead Sea. Unfortunately, it's a little bit too hazy today. On a clear day, you can see the Dead Sea off in that direction. Right beyond that ridge where you see that's where the Dead Sea is. So this is Highway 1. It goes all the way from the Dead Sea and beyond to Jerusalem, to Tel Aviv, and further. Now, the road that is, perpendicular? Geometry today. So that road is, at this section, it's actually called 437. We're going to travel on that. But this small section of it was given a different name. It really is Route 60. I assume that on your travels yesterday, you traveled Route 60. Everyone travels Route 60 because that was, and still is, the main highway through biblical Israel.
The way of the prophets.
That's correct. It traverses the entire country. We're going to be on it almost all day today. So that's Route 60. And now I want you to notice another road going up the hill, but there's absolutely nothing moving on it. There's just a few parked cars or something there. See? That road?
Yeah.
That is the road to nowhere. That is the road to nowhere. This entire area was supposed to be home to tens of thousands of housing units for young Jewish couples. As a matter of fact, two election cycles ago, it's actually already 3 since this last one was so short, Prime Minister Netanyahu campaigned on the massive new construction that would solve our housing crisis by building tens of thousands of homes in this E1 area. And as you can see, it didn't happen. It didn't happen because the American administration pretty much would not allow it to happen.
The Obama administration.
I didn't say it. Yes, our friends. So the road leads to nowhere. The road, all of the infrastructure, all of the lighting, sewage, water, at a cost of many millions, was prepared for all of these new housing units, and nothing happened. So the road leads to nowhere. The only thing that's there, you'll see there, is a police station, which services this entire area. What you see here on the left is a border police installation. It's mostly an infirmary, but we'll pass it on our way down. And all of the rest of this is Hebrew University up here. So what's the story? This section that we're looking at right here, you can see it much more clearly from the other side. I have a picture here of the reverse angle somewhere. I do not have a picture of it from the reverse angle. I left it in the car maybe. Okay, what you're seeing, in any case, this is the last section of open space in the entire ring around Jerusalem from the east. We don't have to buy the land. That's the key. This belongs to the state of Israel. This is state land. This is state land. And there really isn't any reason other than political pressure that the state of Israel cannot build whatever it wants here. Now, there are certain things that you should know about this section of land, aside from the obvious, that Jerusalem has a very serious housing crisis, and this would solve it, and this is what would help buffer the state of Israel's Jerusalem's eastern approaches, because the only thing that's out there is Jordan, right, and the quote-unquote the West Bank. So what you're looking at is essentially a stranglehold around the capital of Israel. This is the only access that Israel has left. If at some point it were attacked again from the east, there would be no way to go other than through hostile, foreign-controlled population centers to move forces, machinery, supplies. This is it. So you want to really take care of this piece of territory. And what the state of Israel has found and has been proven without a doubt over many, many years in the Gaza Strip as well, is that the best way to control a piece of territory is not to keep it open like this, but to put Jewish families there.
You said that Americans didn't allow it to be held.
Yes.
What's the way they do it? Is it indirect?
Oh no, it's direct. It's completely direct. You build one single thing there, and
they directly press.
They will cut off all funding. They will cut off loan guarantees.
Because they call them illegal settlements. So
Yeah. Now we need to talk about the legal background of all of this, which we will do in a moment. But I just wanted you to.
But this is Israeli land.
Indeed. This is registered to the state of Israel.
What is the argument for this policy when this is Israeli land? Is it they argue it's against international law? Or
correct. So that's what we need to talk about. What does international law really say about all of this? Okay, we're gonna start from the beginning. But one other thing that I just want to mention is, I don't know how much you're aware of the ecological challenges, but the Dead Sea is in a very, very precarious situation. And part of that is because of all of this sort of construction that cuts off the runoff. If you'll notice, we're up on a high spot, and Jerusalem gets a lot of rain, and that gets none. And the difference between what that looks like and what this looks like is not a coincidence. So the runoff from Jerusalem is what keeps the Dead Sea alive. And if you build without any planning or any sensitivity to the environmental needs of the country, you get the Dead Sea drying up and dying. You get sinkholes, you get massive ecological imbalance. We have a very serious problem, and that's why you have a government and you have experts in ecology and planning, so that you don't destroy the country that you're living in, and there will be something left here for the next generation. So that's another issue to take into account before we get to the political issues. A third issue is, so we've talked about the military, we've talked about the ecology. What we tried to do in Regavim, once we realized that the tens of thousands of housing units weren't going to be built here, was to get this declared a national nature reserve. This section here, up till the highway at least, declared a national nature reserve because of the water problem and because of the proximity to Jerusalem, etc., etc. And we actually succeeded partially. It's supposed to be developed as a national park, and hasn't moved. We're still working on that. This, along with other things on the other side of this hill, closer to Mount Zion. So that's another issue that Regavim is very much involved in. But another thing that I want to just point out before we move on, or move further into the political conversation, is, see on the rise over there? See what that is? So that wasn't there a month ago. And if we go around the side of that hill, I am sure that we will see many, many more of those. Those are Bedouin structures. Now, there have always been Bedouin who graze through all of these areas, but by definition, they don't stay put. They move with the seasons in search of water. That's all a Bedouin needs. Other than that, they're self-sufficient. And that sort of situation where they're actually constructing permanent or semi-permanent structures is a completely new phenomenon. And that's the heart of what we're going to see in the next hour. We'll talk about it in depth, but I just want you to get an idea of what it looks like. We're going to see them from much, much closer. Many, many, many of these Bedouin quote-unquote villages, they are funded by the European Union. Actively funded by the European Union. As a matter of fact, when the State of Israel has somehow, once in a while, taken down an illegal structure in places that are just completely ridiculous, European governments have actually threatened to sue Israel for damages and repayment because they invested money in all of this. Now, the fact that it's illegal by any system of law doesn't strike them as absurd that they're going to sue the State of Israel to compensate them for illegal activity. It's just insane, but that's the situation.
They're actually kind of like settlers.
They are not kind of like settlers. They are settlers, and they are there for political reasons, geopolitical reasons. Okay? So what I want you to do before we move on is just to get your bearings and look at that tower. That's the Hebrew University Tower. We're going to see that tower from 3 or 4 different vantage points as we travel in a circle through E1, just so that you can always be able to relate to where we are on the map. That's one of our landmarks, okay? So, now we wanted to talk about international law. International law and Judea and Samaria. Many people like to call Israeli settlements illegal based on the fact that they believe that Israel's presence in these areas is illegal. Now, there is no such law in international law. The Geneva Conventions, the Fourth Geneva Convention in particular, which talks about moving populations into an occupied territory, is based on several assumptions. Number one, we're talking about territory that was taken by one sovereign state from another sovereign state in a war of aggression. Okay? So that just now we had 3 different, what do you call that in English? It's not even, what is that? Stipulations that are all irrelevant to the case of Israel and Judea and Samaria. Number one, there was never any other sovereignty, recognized sovereignty, over these areas. Not since the Ottoman Empire, which doesn't exist anymore. The state of Jordan, which was created, strangely enough, by the United Nations, the League of Nations, really, was created more or less illegally, if you ask me, because all of that territory had been set aside as a homeland for the Jewish people, and at a certain point was cut in half, and 2/3 became the state of Jordan. Jordan attacked Israel in 1948 and illegally occupied Judea and Samaria and gave it a new name which had never existed before, West Bank, in order to affiliate it with the East Bank, quote unquote, of the Jordan River. So they created this new nomenclature, that is West Bank, it's the West Bank of something, of the Jordan, but it was always called, including by the League of Nations, the United Nations, the British Mandate, it was always called Judea and Samaria. Palestinian and Palestine did not exist. First of all, the Romans renamed this entire area Palestina in order to erase the Jewish connection to this area.
Destroyed Judea.
They destroyed Judea, they destroyed the temple, they dispersed or took as captives everyone who they could, and left the place decimated. So the fact that international law talks about relocation of populations, first of all, they're talking about forced relocation of populations after a war of aggression. So Israel defended itself against the Jordanians in 1967, but the Jordanian rule in these areas was never recognized internationally. Not only was it not recognized by the United Nations, the League of Nations, it wasn't recognized by the Arab League or any of the other Arab countries. Only 2 countries recognized the Jordanian annexation of what they called the West Bank. One was Great Britain, for its own reasons, and the other was Pakistan. Okay, What can I say? So none of the Arab countries, nor the Arab League, nor the United Nations recognized Jordanian sovereignty in these areas. So Israel did not take sovereignty away from any other sovereign state. In addition, the Geneva Conventions and international law in general never talk about territory taken in a war of self-defense. It has never in the history of the world been required of a country that was defending itself to return land to the aggressor. It's never happened, only in the case of Israel. That's number two. And number three, the transfer of populations, talking about forced transfer as for ethnic cleansing, as what happened in the aftermath of World War I and World War II, where the political the victors or displaced massive populations. We're talking about forced transfer of populations. We're not talking about moving people of its own population who are interested in taking up residence in the liberated territory. So international law really has nothing to say about this situation. The situation that Israel faces is actually unique. The state of Israel's official policy is this is not occupied territory. At most, it could be considered disputed territory, and Israel is completely within its rights to allow the Israeli citizens who are interested in doing so to live in these areas in legal, planned, permitted, fully administered and regulated communities, not wherever you want. Jewish person, just because he's a Jewish person, can't take a piece of land and build a house. It doesn't work that way. The state of Israel is a sovereign state. It has laws, it has planning codes, it builds communities or allows others to build communities by permit with an eye towards the future, with an eye towards ecology and proper land use. And what we're going to see today is a violation of all of that, but only one-sided. Okay? So that's international law. What I'd like to do now is take you out, first of all, to Ma'ale Adumim, which is the largest community in this area. The settlement, quote unquote, of Ma'ale Adumim has over 35,000 residents. It is a city, and a thriving and beautiful one. It's not my cup of tea because it has a desert climate and I can't stand it. I live in the mountains where it's cool. I don't do well in the heat. So, but we're going to have a look. And what I'd like you to notice as we leave here, we're going to go down and travel on that road towards Ma'ale Adumim. Just at the entrance to Ma'ale Adumim, I hope we'll be able to hear one another by phone, but I don't want to miss it. To your right will be the entrance to Abu Dis. Abu Dis was discussed at length as the possible capital for a Palestinian state. It would be its Jerusalem capital. Abu Dis is a neighborhood of Jerusalem, right? It's an all-Arab neighborhood of Jerusalem, in which has been turned into Area A, meaning it was given over lock, stock, and barrel to Palestinian Authority control. Another place like that, there are several of these Jerusalem neighborhoods that we'll drive past or through today. One of them is El Azariah, where there was massive rioting this past week. One of them is Isawiya. We're going to have a look as we come down from Hebrew University, and I'm going to try to pull over to the side if there's no bus coming behind us so that you can see what a neighborhood looks like, a neighborhood in a modern democracy, what it looks like when nobody enforces the law. We'll just get an idea and think about what it must be like to live there. These Jerusalem neighborhoods, particularly the one over here, are hotbeds of crime. There's very, very serious drug trade. There's all kinds of social problems. And these are neighborhoods in Jerusalem, which in Europe are actually called no-go zones. We invented it. Unfortunately, this is one of Israel's great startups. There are places where, although they are part of Israel, the government just stays out for obvious political reasons. So we'll have a quick look as we drive by. It'll be on your right. We'll have a look at what it looks like when the government does not enforce any law, not planning codes. I'd also like you to notice, as we go by, we'll be looking down into the valley, notice the roofs of the houses. Now, Israel is one of the most advanced users in the world of solar power. And hot water, all of our houses, is heated by the sun. We have a lot of that, and it's free. So notice the cisterns on the roofs of the houses. Some of them are white, and in the neighborhood you're going to see here, many more of them are black. Now, what is the difference? What color are the cisterns? Because the cisterns that are black are illegal. They are not hooked up to the main water system. That means that the houses that they are standing on top of are illegal. It means they're not hooked up to electricity legally. It means that they are tapped into the mains and are stealing water. And it's not like nobody knows, because you'll have a look and you'll see. The Israeli taxpayer, aside from the hundreds of millions of shekels that the Palestinian Authority owes the State of Israel for electricity, which is always an issue, notice how much of it we don't charge them for because it's quote-unquote illegal and they turn a blind eye. Try to notice as we drive through these neighborhoods what the proportion of black cisterns to white cisterns is, and just get an idea of what we're looking at. Okay? These people have permanent residency in Jerusalem, in Israel. They are Jerusalem Arabs. They do not vote because they will not recognize the authority of the State of Israel. So they are administered to by the Palestinian Authority.
They don't vote because they don't want to?
Correct. If Jerusalem's Arabs would go out to vote, we would have a very, very different political situation in the Jerusalem municipality, but they don't vote. There was actually a party that ran in these most recent municipal elections. The man was... he tried to break that taboo and say we can get what we need to live like human beings if we participate in the political framework. And they refused, and he was threatened with death, and they put people outside the polling stations to make sure nobody came to vote. And
Who was that? What was his name?
Palestinian? Oh, I don't remember. I can look it up for you. But so this is what it looks like. Notice the proximity of the houses to one another. Notice the standards of construction. Notice it's a shambles. There are no streets. There are no nothing. It's insane. And this is what it looks like when you don't enforce the law. This is what we're trying to keep the rest of Israel from looking like. I don't want to live in a place that looks like this.
This is ruled by the Palestinian Authority?
Yeah.
But they have their own building codes, kind of, or what?
They don't enforce it either because it's in their best interest to get as many people in here as possible. And they just don't want to deal with it. Officially, this is part of Jerusalem. And the situation is so bizarre that nobody really knows what's what anymore. Is it Area A? Is it Israel proper? Is it Jerusalem? This is part of the territory that was annexed, and nothing's being done. Okay, so as we travel through, we're going to see other places that look like this or even more bizarre. We'll see some of them that are closer to the road, and keep in mind that this is what we're trying to avoid. Okay, there's the social problems from this area are massive because there's no law enforcement and because it's a seen community. They have access to everything in all of Jerusalem. These people have complete freedom of, I mean, they're part of Israel, but they're also part of the Palestinian Authority, and that becomes a very, very porous situation where things are coming through that shouldn't be. So we have a problem. 2009, Salam Fayyad, who was the Prime Minister of the Palestinian Authority, published a plan. It was called Ending the Occupation, Establishing the State. You can look it up and you can see the text of the plan, of the Fayyad plan, as it's called, on the internet. The idea was that for 4 years, from 2005, when they signed the last of the agreements with the State of Israel, the Palestinian Authority sat back quietly, didn't negotiate, which was what was supposed to happen, didn't do anything. And then in 2009, Salam Fayyad officially declared the time for negotiation is over. This is not how we're going to achieve our state, and the path of negotiation is a dead end. So we are going to de facto unilaterally create a Palestinian state in Area C. Only in Area C. Why in Area C? Because areas A and B are already ours. And in order for us to create a Palestinian state, what we need to do is take over Area C. So how do we do that? And we have hundreds of statements by Salam Fayyad and by Mahmoud Abbas and by all the other leadership of the Palestinian Authority saying exactly how they're going to do it. They didn't hide it. They publicized this plan and they said, the Bedouin are the soldiers for the creation of the Palestinian state. How do we do it? Very simple. The Bedouin in the Judean desert have been here for many years. They've come through this area. The reason that they're in this area is because there was a blood feud in the Jahalim tribe. The tribe actually originates from the Arad area. Been there for about 180 years. There was a blood feud. The weaker parts of the tribe were pushed out and they migrated north up into the Judean desert, and they're in this area for the past 70 years or so, coming through this area on their yearly route. Now, the Palestinian Authority identified critical strategic areas that needed to be taken under Palestinian control if they were going to create territorial contiguity from Bethlehem to Ramallah to Jericho, the main triangle of power that would give them access to the eastern border and to the Negev, down to the south towards Gaza, and Ramallah towards Nablus. So they identified critical areas, and then they had a very, very simple and ingenious plan. What does a Bedouin need in order to stay put? Only one thing: water. So the Palestinian Authority took water tankers and put them in strategic locations where they wanted the Bedouin to collect and remain. And then every 2 weeks they would come and put another water tanker there. The Bedouin collected and stayed put. And that's exactly what they were hoping would happen. Then the second thing they did in every single case, and we have documentation of hundreds, literally hundreds of cases of this, the second thing they built in every one of these outposts was a school. Why a school? First of all, because it attracts population, and second of all, because it makes fabulous photo opportunities. When the State of Israel has to demolish a school and deny Bedouin children who are extremely vulnerable and underprivileged education, then they don't look good. And this is what they do. So where we're going to go, Khan al-Ahmar, in about 10 minutes, the first thing they did was put water tankers there, and the second thing they did was an Italian NGO called Vento de Terra built a school. And that was when Regavim got involved. They built this school, Khan al-Ahmar School, on land that belongs to the Jewish community of Kfar Adumim. It's part of the master plan for expansion. It is literally on Route 1, it butts Route 1. It is in an area, a terrain that is impossible to live in, really. And the Palestinian Authority created this outpost there in order to control Route 1 and in order to limit the ability of the Kfar Adumim community to expand and to grow on its own land that was part of its master plan. So when this first permanent structure was built at Khan al-Ahmar, the Kfar Adumim people asked Regavim to represent them in court, which is exactly what we did, because we are experts in, first of all, collecting the field information, researching the legal status of the land, finding precedents, and taking these issues to court. So we represented them in court. This was the second half of the answer to the question someone asked before about how Regavim is funded. So we're funded by donations, and we're also funded through legal fees when we represent municipalities or regional councils in court. So we went, in 2009, we took the Khan al-Ahmar case to court. Now, the Bedouin living in Khan al-Ahmar, it's a very interesting situation, and it really encapsulates the whole problem. Does anybody want to sit down for this? Because there's benches. Anybody who wants to sit, you can do that too. So the Khan al-Ahmar story encapsulates the problem, which is why it's a flagship for them, and it's also a key exemplar for us. The Bedouin living at Khan al-Ahmar never claimed to own the land that they're living on. They have no claims, and they never even, it didn't stop them in other places, but it was clear that they did not own this land. It is state land, part of the master plan for both for Route 1 expansion and for the community of Ma'ale Adumim, of Kfar Adumim, excuse me. We took the case to court. The Supreme Court found that this outpost was in fact illegal and dangerous and had to be removed. That Israel was completely within its rights to demolish Khan al-Ahmar, but because these people were so vulnerable and underprivileged, even though they are not citizens of Israel, and they are the full responsibility of the Palestinian Authority, the State of Israel, the Supreme Court required the state to create an alternative for them. So the State of Israel spent millions and created a new neighborhood called Jahalim West, just outside of Abu Dis, on Israeli-owned state land adjacent to a Palestinian Authority-controlled area, so that they could have the best of both worlds. Now, the Palestinian Authority, you would say, being that it had concern for these people, should have found them situations within Abu Dis, rather than keeping them outside like these. But obviously, what they are interested in is not the well-being of the people who are living on the road without sewage, electricity, or a school that has electricity, running water, air conditioning, any of those things. It wants the land, so it kept them there, and it continues to keep them there. In any case, the people who are living in Khan al-Ahmar, 80% of them came to an agreement with the State of Israel, accepted the Israeli government's relocation package, which involved free land, full development, electricity, water, access to employment and transportation and everything else, just outside Abu Dis. 20% of them held out for a better deal. Eventually, that 20% also wanted to agree to relocate to Jahalim West, but a very scary shadow society called the Society of St. Yves, which is a quote-unquote church-run humanitarian aid society, got
It's
involved.
funded by the foundation of the Christian Social Party in Germany.
Correct. They got involved, and they forced the Jahalin to retract the agreement that they signed with the State of Israel. So, they went to court, actually, and claimed that the Jahalin were incapable of understanding what the agreement was that they had signed, and they have not agreed really with full informed consent to relocate. And it's been going through the Supreme Court ever since. 6 times, as a matter of fact, the Supreme Court of Israel found that Khan al-Ahmar is an illegal outpost and must be removed and relocated. Before the previous government fell, the Khan al-Ahmar was slated for demolition, and the people were slated for relocation to the new neighborhood. The night before it was supposed to happen, Prime Minister Netanyahu called Minister of Defense Avigdor Lieberman at the time and said, don't do it. Now, there are a lot of rumors going around about why he said this, but apparently, and this is apparently, Angela Merkel was on her way to Israel to receive an honorary doctorate, and from the plane she called Netanyahu and said, if this happens while I am en route to Israel, I will not land. I will turn the plane around and I will go back. You will not remove Khan al-Ahmar. So he called it off. There's massive international involvement in this outpost. And you can see it every day.
Why do you call the Society of St. Yves scary?
Because they have no requirement by law to report what they're doing or how they're doing it, because it's apparently it's considered a religious society. They're highly politicized. They flood the Supreme Court of Israel with petitions and counter petitions, and there's a backlog of decades of legal cases that they initiate in order to make the courts unable to actually deal with real legal issues. They publicly announced this tactic years ago, and they have gone about doing this for years. Because the Supreme Court of the State of Israel does not require legal standing in order to bring a petition, anyone in the world can petition the Supreme Court of Israel. It's a very strange situation, yes. This is part of the problem with the activist court. That is a conversation for another day. But the Society of St. Yves represents Palestinian appellants to the Supreme Court in dozens, scores of cases, hundreds of cases, all the time. They have unlimited funds and unlimited patience. They don't care what the outcome is because they will stall a case from being decided for decades at a time.
And they're founded
And-
by German taxpayer money through the foundation of the Christian Social Union.
Indeed.
Hans
Yes.
Seidel Foundation?
Okay. So, one of the founders of this Society of St. Ives is a fascinating person you should look into if you're interested. An American-born Jewish lawyer named Linda Burstein, I believe. I have the details. Fascinating. I tried to look back into it. She came to Israel under the law of return, immediately converted to Islam. No, she immediately no. She converted to Roman Catholicism, founded the Society of St. Ives, did whatever damage she could, and then eventually converted to Islam. And she's floating around someplace now. I have no idea what her name is now, but it's one of these wild stories. It's like they could make a movie out of this. In any case, so the Society of St. Ives is one of the organizations that uses lawfare. It from the inside out makes the Israeli judiciary system implode and kill itself. And this is what's happening. So Khan al-Ahmar is also part of this story. So many of the things that we deal with on a regular basis are happening at Khan al-Ahmar, which is why I want to take you there and show you exactly what it looks like on the ground. You'll be shocked at how insignificant it looks and how significant it really is. So again, all of these little encampments that you see on the outside of Abu Dis, and that we'll see more and more and more of them, I want you to keep your eyes open for the rectangular, prefabricated, permanent structures that are there. Many of them have the EU emblem on the side, and the European Union claims diplomatic immunity for these structures, which are illegal. Yes, they are illegal. They are placed there without permits. How can they do that?
Yes, diplomatic immunity. It's not
Yes.
an embassy.
Of course it's not. This is what they're saying. You can say anything you want. If nobody argues with you, then it becomes true.
They're claiming sovereign rights within
They
Israel.
are claiming This is not Israel. They simply do not recognize Israeli sovereignty. Now, the fact is, even if you don't recognize Israeli sovereignty, under international law and under the Oslo Accords, which the European Union signed and continues to claim that it supports and wants to see recognized, etc., as the basis for a solution, under all of those things, this activity is illegal. Because even if Israel were considered an occupying power, under international law, only the occupying power has the right, the authority, or the responsibility to give building permits. And no one has the right, even in occupied territory, to break the law that is imposed by the occupying power. Foreign governments don't have that right. Foreign organizations don't have that right. Individuals don't have that right. So under the Geneva Conventions, under the Oslo Accords, under Israeli law, this is illegal no matter which way you look at it. And still, they're claiming diplomatic immunity, and still, the government of Israel is, I won't say folding, let's say bending. Bending to the point where it is horizontal.
So, normal ways they could force the law executive, as executive, so the government.
The government
But
has
they-
full authority. The problem is this. So what happened is, for years, we began to notice this phenomenon of these permanent outposts in critical strategic areas that were being created with the help and full support and ongoing support of the European Union. It was orchestrated by the Palestinian Authority using the Bedouin as place markers in critical areas. We began to track all of this, we began to map it out, and we began to notice the pattern that emerged. We took our findings to the government of Israel and we bashed them over the head for years until they finally came to the understanding that this poses a strategic threat. It's not just some little humanitarian issue. It's not something that they can ignore, because this is creating a reality on the ground that is endangering Jerusalem, is endangering the communities here, and is creating de facto Palestinian control over strategic areas throughout Judea and Samaria. Eventually, Prime Minister Netanyahu understood. He took this and confronted Federica Mogherini, and she gave an EU commitment to desist from any future illegal construction in E1. Now, I'm very careful about what I said. Let's explore that. Her commitment was that the European Union would no longer build structures, and we're talking about only building, not agricultural work, and only in E1. Everywhere else in Judea and Samaria was still fair game. She was not willing to commit to stopping illegal activity, period, which is, if you think about it, an absolutely absurd situation where if you're admitting that this is illegal and you're not going to do it in E1, why is it okay to do everywhere else in Judea and Samaria? Well, it's not, and it's still illegal, and it's illegal everywhere else. But
the government could send the police and arrest them all.
that is what the government should do. It's not actually the police, it's the military, because this whole area is under military rule, essentially. So the IDF, or the civil administration, and the IDF are responsible for enforcing the law here, but it's all a question of government resolve, government policy, government decisions, as is evidenced by the fact that Khan al-Ahmar is still there. The Supreme Court 6 times has given permission to remove it. Now, what's insane, being that I am a Jewish Israeli, what's insane to me is that when the Supreme Court gives a similar decision about illegal construction in the Jewish sector, it gives a date. It says, you must destroy the houses that are 30 centimeters over the line in Netiv HaAvot by the 1st of June. And that's what happens. But in the case of Khan al-Ahmar, and in the many other things that we're going to see today, the court says, you are allowed to destroy these places, but we will not get involved in military priorities. So the military has to decide where on its list of priorities this demolition stands. And of course, it's always at the bottom of the list of priorities. So you have unequal enforcement of the law, you have unequal judiciary treatment of the two sectors, and what you have on the ground is chaos. It's actually not chaos, it's very, very carefully controlled chaos that the Palestinian Authority is creating and the European Union is facilitating. So we're going to go now to Khan al-Ahmar. We can't go inside, it's now a closed military zone, but we will overlook it just to give you an idea of what it is. And there you'll see a whole parade of dignitaries, foreign diplomats, Palestinian Authority functionaries. There's always something going on here. They have arts. They have an arts fair with all these anti-Semitic cartoons. They had a whole mind-boggling.
Developing.
Yes, wonderful. Cultural
high tech.
They had an art exhibit of
An
cartoons.
exhibition of
Yes, in the Khan al-Ahmar school, under those trees is the school. Now the school is built out of tires and mud and reused falafel oil. Okay? There's no electricity and no running water. It is literally on the highway. So from the school, sometimes they throw rocks at the cars that pass on the highway. But these are the conditions that the Palestinian Authority is forcing these people to live in.
Is it open for tourists if you want to have a
Right
look
now,
on it?
right now, I can't go there. It's, Israelis are not allowed to go in. It's
But
military.
If you come from EU and want to see what happens with our money and
You
taxes,
could probably
you
go in.
can
I
have
don't think
look,
there's a
or-
problem. You'd probably be treated like dignitaries if you call the Palestinian Authority, and they'll drive you in there in a whole limousine, and you can sit there and talk to these
delegation
people.
from you, and we will.
They'll be very happy.
Well, some of their cartoons or something.
So the interesting thing about this is, again, this is Khan al-Ahmar. Now, if you look just around the bend here, across the road, there's another one. That one we've gone to the Supreme Court over. We're calling that one Khan al-Ahmar 2. Over there is Khan al-Ahmar 3, 4, 5, 6. As we travel from here, you'll see 7 through 15. There's about 170 of these in this area alone, and it stretches all the way down this entire spine that would create the territorial backbone of the Palestinian state. That's why they're here. It's not that they just happen to be here.
For the long run. So
Yes. So now I'll show you quickly, before we all fry out here, this is the neighborhood outside Abu Dis that the State of Israel created for these people
Yes.
and offered them, in addition to fully developed residential plots with electricity,
Streets
running
also,
water,
mhm.
streets, a
Tarred
school with
roads,
tarred
everything.
roads, access to transportation, employment, right? A school with air conditioning and a playground, etc., running water, that sort of thing.
Israeli standard,
Yes.
sort of
Okay.
close to. No, it
Right
looks like
outside
Israeli.
Abu Dis.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is it. But the Palestinian Authority said you may not move. They actually arrested the men who live here, brought them to Ramallah to the dungeons, threatened them with physical harm. We have it on tape. They've given interviews where they say we're between a rock and a hard place, and they really are. We have nothing against these people. These people are being used as pawns. And all of them, and all of these encampments are being used to help the Palestinian Authority create control for the Palestinian state in critical strategic areas.
What does the EU funding go for? It doesn't look like there's anything there.
First of all, it's paying them to stay there.
They get
second-
money from the
Yes.
EU,
Yes.
the residents.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then you'll see that all through where we're going to go now. It also helps the Palestinian Authority incentivize people here and elsewhere to move to places in Area C where they've never lived before and build. The Palestinian Authority, for example, where we're going to go next, gives everybody a tax break and free car licensing, etc., etc. If you move, you leave your house in areas A or B and move out into Area C. In order
This is
to-
Area C, so this is Israeli control.
Yes. Yes.
Maybe not
Full-
very much people
Yeah.
use this possibility.
Are the numbers known of money that such
So
an
for this particular one, I can't tell you, but we know how much is coming in,
yes,
and how they divide it up, I don't know. But this is—I just want to explain to you how we do what we do at Regavim. So again, this entire area was slated for the eventual growth, the natural growth of Kfar Adumim, which is the community over here. When Kfar Adumim saw that a permanent structure was being built here, the school, they turned to us. So what do? The first thing that we do is, even though we were aware of what was happening on the ground, we went to the state archives and we did research. So we looked back. We looked back in state archives to see what was here before. Now, in this case, we went back to 1967. Notice, there's nothing there.
Yeah.
Right? It's not like there was here and they got chased away by the Israelis, which they sometimes claim. Okay? Then we went a little bit further down. Here you are in 1978. They did graze in this area, but they didn't stay here, and they didn't build here, and they didn't make any claims to this, right? And then, 1999, you see a couple of
Yes.
right? But when it really, really exploded onto the scene was 2009, 10 years after this, when the Fayad plan was published. And that's when they began to build permanent structures. Okay? So, what we're going to do, what you see beyond it is the Mishor Adumim industrial area where the Soda Stream plant was. That industrial
That's
area.
where SodaStream was.
Yes, indeed.
And they had to move, leaving the people here unemployed.
Unemployed.
That's
And-
the one you were talking about.
Correct. Now, the people who live here and in there and in there and in all of these little outposts actually do find employment in the Jewish communities
Yeah.
around here and in the industrial areas. But the main income at this point for Khan al-Ahmar is European money that's being
European
paid through the
pension.
Palestinian Authority to keep them here.
How many people were left unemployed when SodaStream had to move?
900. Over 900
They were Bedouins.
Bedouins, yes, Bedouins.
I would have another question. You told us how the Palestinian Authority is treating the Bedouins. For example, this patriarch of
Yes.
this village. The Bedouins must know about it, yeah. And this isn't
They
it
don't.
letting them to more sympathy for the Israeli?
No,
Authority?
the Bedouins. It's a very complex situation. Bedouins are stateless people. They don't own land. They have never owned land. The Bedouin philosophy is you don't own land, the land owns you. They have, in the past 100 years, in Israel and elsewhere, have gone through a natural process of what we call urbanization. There are almost no more nomadic populations.
Yeah, no, the
They're
Bedouins in America,
semi-nomadic. So
they have
the
no
Bedouins in
camels,
America,
but jeeps. Yeah.
so they have camels just as a hobby kind of thing. This is another thing we became very involved with because they don't take care of them and they cause terrible
They are
road
making
accidents. They
tourists,
just, yeah. So we have a problem. The same is true of Khan al-Ahmar. Once it hit the news and the Palestinian Authority became involved, they hired flocks from much, much further out to graze here. As you can see, it's not grazing ground. There's no reason to bring them here, but they bring flocks here. So all of a sudden, you see these flocks, large flocks, and this is a whole traditional herding community and they create a whole narrative. Yeah, and but it's all, they're actually hiring flocks from further down in the desert to bring them here to create the illusion that this is a herding community, but it's not.
Vivid, sizzling community.
Sure.
But it does sizzle, but only from the heat.
Correct.
What's this relatively orderly thing over there?
That's
straight
a
ahead?
Jewish farm. That is a
That's
Jewish
what I
farm.
thought. Yeah,
That's a Jewish farm.
the Jewish farm, the relatively orderly thing. That's what I was asking.
Yeah.
And more orderly, and they're probably really working there.
Yes. So this community, if we had time, I would take you through. It's a really beautiful place. This Kfar Adumim has a new neighborhood also, Nofei Prat. And you have some of the most magnificent desert views from here. If you like that.
How is the public opinion, discussion, and press coverage about this problem?
If it weren't for Regavim, it would be non-existent.
Non-existent.
Non-existent. Israelis have so many things to deal with, right? So, and people in this area in particular are used to seeing Bedouin. It's always been that way, and that's never been a problem. So they don't really pay attention to the difference between a nomadic Bedouin camp that's here now and is gone when the winter comes, or one that just happens to stay there all the time. And they don't really, a lot of these things just slip under the radar. Also, the government does everything that it can to lull the voters into a false sense of security. We're on top of the situation. Everything is fine. All remain calm. All is well. Did you ever see that movie? There's a movie, I think it's in the 1970s, called "The Russians Are Coming." The Russians are coming. So they had these agents who were standing in the town that was being overrun by enemy forces, and their whole job was to stand on the street corners and say, "Remain calm. All is well. Remain calm. All is well." And that's what you have. The government does not want an uproar. It doesn't want a head-to-head collision with the Palestinian Authority or with its European supporters. And so it is burying its head in the sand and allowing the situation on the ground to spiral out of control.
Is it right? My impression is, and this is important for our point of view, that the European Union is one of the most important game maker in this region. Is it right?
The European Union spends hundreds of millions of euros every year to create a Palestinian state. And it declares, since 2011, it openly has declared, and you can go onto its website at any time, the EASS website, with all of its projects and all of its funding, and it says that the point of its funding of these hundreds of millions of euros, it may even be more than that at this point, is to create a Palestinian state. The fact that they are doing this unilaterally, without any negotiation, when on the one hand they say they want a negotiated settlement to the conflict, and on the other hand they're making negotiations completely impossible, unlikely, and unnecessary, because they are creating the Palestinian state, which should be the result of negotiation. That's wrong. It's wrong. It's just plain wrong. If you want a negotiated, mutually acceptable, and therefore sustainable solution to the conflict here, you need to incentivize the sides to negotiate, and not incentivize one side not to negotiate. By giving the Palestinian Authority everything that it wants and more, without the need for compromise or negotiation with Israel, you are creating a time bomb.
בירושלים של זהב,